Welcome to our presentation on the Secure Erie Smart City project. We are excited to be joined here by representatives from Quantela and the Erie Innovation District. My name is Liz Glavinsky. I am a business development manager here at CIMCON Lighting, and we're joined by Carl Sanchack, the president and CEO of the Erie Innovation District, and Aaron Simkin, the vice president of strategic partnerships and alliances at Quantela. And I will let you guys introduce yourselves a little further. Aaron, why don't you go ahead and start?
Hey guys, my name is Aaron Simpkin. I'm the VP of Strategic Alliances and Partnerships at Quantela. My aim is to work both with technical partners as well as cities to drive innovation and to drive smart cities. We have two models. One is we approach it from a software perspective where we try to provide a command and control systems where city administrators can help manage all of their assets. And recently we've brought in a financing model on top of that, which Carl's going to talk a lot more about today.
So this is Carl Sanchack. I'm the president and CEO of the Erie Innovation District. I have the honor of leading the public-private partnership to develop and transform our downtown. Like a number of folks listening to this webcast and abroad, Erie, Pennsylvania is a city that has struggled through changes over time from shift from heavy manufacturing into specific advanced manufacturing verticals as opposed to its history. And that change has caused a lot of challenges and a lot of opportunities for improvement. And today we're going to talk about how we've made those improvements from a digital infrastructure point of view, why that's important to the city in terms of not only services, but also in terms of ecosystem, and more specifically to today's topic, how does our partnerships with Quantela and Digital Alpha and CIMCON and others lend itself to a financing model that can be leveraged by cities like Erie that are struggling to bring themselves up to the level where they can compete globally. So that's today's discussion.
Great, thank you guys for that introduction. So, Carl, you're alluding a little bit to this in your introduction, but can you start by telling us about what some of the largest needs or challenges Erie, Pennsylvania faces or was facing before taking on this project? And maybe telling us a little bit about the smart city vision that you had in mind before you started working on it.
Sure, happy to do that. So let me level set for everybody who's listening. Erie, Pennsylvania is about 90,000 people in its urban core, about 250,000 when you look at it from a county perspective. In that central city urban district, over time we've seen a decline from 140,000 people down to about the 90,000 I spoke of. So over the last several decades, we've seen a population exodus. That includes students leaving the colleges and going to work in other cities and other locations around the world and not staying in Erie where they grew up and lived. Further, our urban core, we have a very significant challenge in terms of poverty and in terms of the median income for folks in the city. To put that in practical terms, think of it this way. The kids in our school district, our public school district is what I'm specifically referring to, 100% of them are on the food program. 40% of their families live below the poverty line. So you can imagine a city that's had a significant downturn in population, it's had a shift from its manufacturing base, and it's got this kind of poverty and challenge, and a median income of the place I'm sitting in. And the picture you see is the building I'm literally sitting in. That's sitting in a district where zip code's median salary is $10,800 a year. That's per year, $10,800. So coming into this, we were thinking, okay, what can we do as a city to really turn the needle, turn the dial, make this something completely new, something different? Like many another city, we looked at smart cities as a method to getting there. But a couple of things we wanted to do a little differently. One was we wanted to integrate all our services, so over time we would see some benefits and efficiencies from that, which I think a lot of folks would welcome. And the other thing was, can we leverage this to build new opportunities, create jobs, and do some things that would be inject our urban core with a high technology opportunity space for new jobs, new employees, and keep those kids from graduating from our colleges and leaving the area. So as you see on the chart, we work together across the mayor's office, city council, the local public utility, and others, and we created something different. And in the case of trying to do something different, the first thing we had to resolve was, how would we finance this? It's all well and good to say we'd like to have a digital infrastructure, we'd like to have services, and in this case we were talking about smart lighting, public access Wi-Fi, and some urban security. How would we finance something like that in a city that was, struggling at looking ahead to 2023 and some fiscal challenges that it wasn't easily going to be able to resolve? How would we do that? So working with the partners at Quantela, who came to Erie as a solutions provider and a systems integrator, and a third party called Digital Alpha, we came up with a model where basically private equity, private entities capitalize this. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but that's the base story coming in. We have a city to lift. We've got a challenge. We've got old infrastructure, and we need to do something together and do it creatively. In any case, one of the things we tried to do was we said, okay, look, let's focus our activities so that they're not spread out everywhere. So we started with a pilot in our downtown. Our city is bisected with a street called State Street that goes north-south, literally, through the city. So we used that and the major public square as sort of a pilot zone. We were going to take a look at, can we provide public access Wi-Fi, and by that I mean free basic services to the citizens in that area? Could we provide lighting that would be cost efficient, moving from the old sodium vapor to something that's smarter, not just in terms of usage of energy, but actually controllable? And then third, could we provide some security in terms of things like license plate recognition? And we did this and successfully did this in 2018. And then we thought, okay, Erie, like many another city, has some very distressed areas. You see them on this chart in blue. These are 8 of our opportunity zones. For those who are not familiar with opportunity zones, that they're a federal designation. They're part of a new Tax and Jobs Cut Act enacted in 2017. But essentially what they're saying is these are federally recognized areas where the communities are struggling in one form or another, in distress. In our city, they happen to be dead in the downtown and along our bayfront, interestingly enough. So we thought, okay, if we're going to move from a straight up and down north-south pilot, wouldn't it be great if we could take these parts of the city that are the ones that need the most help and flip the story. Let's give them the very best of the solutions and make them actually attractive to other companies, attractive to people to come in and move and live. People in place. How do you get to live, work, and play? We would do that in smart cities, and we did this in blue. And what you're actually seeing is literally the design we laid out for providing public access Wi-Fi throughout those urban areas. This is about, give or take, about 4.5 square miles. So you're talking about a fairly large surface area. And we started doing that with the intention of completing this by July of 2020. But we are, in fact, rolling out public access Wi-Fi that's free. The way we achieved that was the private equity from Digital Alpha allowed the city to capitalize the hardware. The city is really only paying a fraction of the total cost back. We're going to provide additional services and find some ways to leverage community advertising and the rest to make up the difference. And we have a partner, fiber provider, in this case called VelocityNet, and they stood up. They said, we're going to offer 10 years, you heard that right, 10 years of basic service to this community at no cost. So the backhaul on this was free in this area. So the net to the community is a several $1 million investment for literally $300,000 of payoff required back over 10 years. And that's incredibly low. So this was our strategy, and we're actually deploying it right now. I'm happy to say that having done this, The other piece of the equation was the federal government looked at this and saw it as a unique model and decided recently and announced through an Appalachian Regional Commission to add in a $500,000 grant to further supplement the growth of this footprint in public Wi-Fi. Because if you recall, I said we have all these students that are living below the poverty line. While there's actually broadband in their areas, that doesn't mean they have access to it. They can't afford it. It's the bottom line. So we're actually going to provide it. They'll have access to it in and around their areas where they live, and we're going to find means for them to be able to connect even further. But first, provide the means, provided it free, and then figure out a way to further enable our community and make them prosperous. One more chart. So if you can move it forward. So as you look at this, one of the challenges, of course, is not everything is easy, and you got to figure out ways to deploy this hardware and these services. So what we looked at was we said, well, okay, we worked with a public utility, in this case, an entity called Penelec, First Energy, and said, well, you know, we'd like to be able to mount the access points on the poles along with things like the CIMCON controllers for the smart lighting, because part of our means of the city repaying its piece of this cost was energy efficiency. If we could agree on a new rate structure for these poles that's fixed like it had been previously, but now fixed at a different rate, the city can essentially pay back the cost of their piece of the capitalization through savings. And if we spread that savings over time, the cost per year is less than what they're actually capturing in savings. So that was our goal, and that's what we're doing. But, you know, there's attachment costs for monitoring these things. There's costs of operations and power and the rest. So we looked at a really creative approach. What you're seeing in this graphic is some of the access points for the Wi-Fi will be mounted to buildings. So we're reaching out to our community to say, if you help us to spread the network for this free public access Wi-Fi and allow us to put access points on your facilities, we will provide you with letters of charitable donation and service that you can recognize, because the Erie Innovation District is a 501c3. As a nonprofit, we can make that kind of statement. We can work with our fiber provider to show the actual operational cost. So these various facilities throughout the city become partners in our solution and allows us to reduce the total cost of this operation in real terms and spread the network even more broadly to get a very high density and a very high low latency and performance. So bottom line, think a really effective Wi-Fi network with a very broad spectrum, paid for by cost efficiency through lighting in part, and supported by private equity. So this is what we're doing, and we're happily moving forward. And because this is an interesting model, because it really reflects what a city can do when it puts its mind to it, as I said, the federal government's leaning in, and we expect as we move forward that other cities will look to try and do something similar using the resources that it's available within their own communities. Because at the end of the day, we don't expect someone to come in and save the day in our city. We're going to try and do it ourselves, and we're going to get smart and find folks and companies like the ones on this webcast to help us get there. So I'll pause for this moment.
And Carl, if you don't mind me just adding in here on the Atlantis predictive analytics solution, basically our thought process here is once you have all of your smart assets within a single dashboard, whether it be lighting, traffic, waste management, the list goes on and on depending on the needs of the city, you're able to make better decisions as a result of that cross-functionally. So for example, let's say there's heavy crime in a particular area, we can then use that data to have brighter lights at the high traffic, crime times within that area. Or if we're getting, negative data from our environmental sensors showing that there's bad air quality, we can reroute people or notify people. And so the idea here is that once you have all of your data on a single platform, the amount of things that you're able to do with that really is unlimited, and it opens up so many opportunities to both save money, save time, and increase the quality of life for citizens.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So one of the things that we found very attractive in the solution that was provided through Cisco and designed by Quantela was in fact that single pane of glass view across services. Our city, most of the services I'd have to characterize as decades old. They're really looking to a very older technology base. So there's one of two approaches you could take. And one approach is you can do kind of an incremental evolutionary improvements. I think of that as kind of a Band-Aid approach, frankly. You keep coming back and fixing what you already have and maybe marginally improving on it. And at the end of the day, you spend orders of magnitude more money for lower returns. So thinking like a lot of the other countries that have stepped up and leapfrogged, instead of doing that, we look ahead to what are some of the better technologies coming out right now that literally build from a new base, start from a new base, jump the services to a new level, integrate them, and then find paths ahead. So Erie has partnered with, and in partnership with its mayor's office and city council and others, has partnered with a number of companies. So today you're hearing from some of the entities that helped us to get this base platform in place and some of our strategy. As we move ahead, we're looking to other cities. So we've joined networks, including City Possible, because we believe strongly in sharing the lessons learned, figuring out what has been effective. A lot of this is an evolving capability space, but at the end of the day, every time you can drive cost efficiency into the equation, bring new services to the market, and modernize your competing environment, you make your city more attractive. So if you think back to the prior slide, which shows the layout of the city, we want people to stay here. We want people to move in here and see Erie as a cyber hub. Actually move it from the thinking of, hey, it's a city that has historically been described as Rust Belt to, gee, that's actually a digital destination. They've got a lot of services that we don't see in some of even the bigger cities. They got a single control point, and oh, by the way, because of that, we can actually bring our new technologies and show how they work. So I guess you could say the end game is better services for the citizens, but also a kind of a living lab marketplace for those companies and entities that have something to bring to bear and want to be able to actually show it in a real live city on scale for how effective or how much improvement that it brings to the equation. So there's a lot of opportunities for Erie. The net result has been we've got companies moving in from Cleveland, New Jersey, and surrounding regions for the first time in years, actually decades, and a great deal of investment. For those who wonder what I mean by that, in practical terms, in terms of downtown physical land development, we're north of 600 million right now for the first time in I think 30 years. And we announced a $10 million investment program in startups from a venture base that was effectively zero, or as close to it as you're going to get. All this was within the space of the last 24 months, and it was initiatives like this that have attracted that new capital, has attracted that growth, has encouraged our existing Fortune 500s to double down on building in our city. This is how you build a model. And while this platform in the smart city is important, it's a means to that end game of really being a competitive city and being a future city. And this is that infrastructure piece that everything else kind of grows upon. I don't have any other slides, Liz, but I think the key for everyone here is, as you look at your strategy, and what Erie did at least was three things. What can we do to improve the services and make this a competitive city where anyone could see technology coming in and being effective as a development play, and build upon our natural resources and manufacturing to actually allow them to scale? So that was item one. Item two, what can we do in the broader world to bring resources to bear? whether that's capital investments, whether that's new partners to the area, and why would they move in? Well, it's things like this is part of the reason they would move in. And then third, what can we do from an educational point of view? And this is the last piece of what I have to share, and I think it's one more piece of this equation showing how even infrastructure plays in. We were looking at education. I mentioned those children in the schools. That wasn't just to give you the tough story, but also to say, here's the opportunity. Those same kids are part of this digital divide. So one of our approaches has been to provide career pathways in the high school for IT, STEM, hackathons, coding camps with the regional universities. We're actually launching an esports competitive league amongst our high schools. All these things are going to build on and sit upon the network in part and the services that we're building out in the smart city. So this is really a holistic approach to get that social smart city, get that livable smart city, and oh, by the way, a business area to be effective. So that really is our story, and I'm ready to answer any questions that the field could have or anything else that maybe Aaron would like to add from the point of view of Quantela, who's been a critical partner in this equation.
Yeah, and just to add from the Quantela perspective, I think, obviously from a software perspective, our belief is that by having everything in a single pane of glass, we're able to provide so much more value to the city because you can then leverage that data. And I know you've all heard it, but data really is the new oil, and what you're able to do with it is unlimited. And we believe that's both in terms of quality of life, but also in terms of savings and additional revenue opportunities for the city. And that's one of the reasons that we've got into this financing model along with our partner Digital Alpha, is because we believe that there really is that opportunity to create additional streams that may not have been there. I mean, for example, if you take lighting, the savings alone that you'll get from that lighting over a 10-year period will pay for itself. And that's one of the reasons why we're willing to finance it up front. As well as Wi-Fi. If you look at Wi-Fi, we're going to then, by providing public Wi-Fi, give local vendors the opportunity to advertise and market on that, which will also give additional revenue to the city. So there's so many new streams that are available now with all the smart digitization that is happening in cities, and we really want to take advantage of that and work with partners and cities to make that happen and make that a reality. So also look forward to any questions you may have, but it's something that's very doable. It's something that we can implement very quickly, and we generally like to start small. Find a location that's high traffic, high impact, and then build on that impact that we make within this smaller area and make it more citywide. And that's exactly what we've done with Erie, and that's exactly what we're planning to do with other cities moving forward as well.
Great. This is all really exciting information and an awesome achievement for Erie. I wonder if you guys together could dive a little bit more deeply into this this equity financing that we're alluding to here, and tell us exactly how that works, how Erie's applied, and maybe how other cities would take advantage of something like that.
Sure. It's an incredibly straightforward model, actually. The details are typically more between the agreements on how they're going to be serviced than the actual financing itself. But let me share a little on both because I think it's illuminating. So we have about a little north of $500,000 in base hardware that we need to deploy in terms of making the public access Wi-Fi available. We're using Meraki systems for that from Cisco, and the reason for that, in addition to their proving their stability, they were incredibly stable in our downtown and nice ranges. But the other thing that's really intriguing is as we roll out those Merakis throughout the city, they're moving towards this, what I think of as kind of like the call roaming model. So in other words, if you're on the network outside and you have the same hardware inside your business or your facility or home or whatever, you can transition from one to the other seamlessly. So it's much like being on a phone roaming. So that's interesting. So the financing from Digital Alpha allows us to purchase these hardwares through the municipality. The municipality is going to actually make the purchase so that we can get the government pricing. So we get bulk pricing for the city, and the agreement has Quantela as our systems integrator, as well as some local, the local fiber provider and some service agencies to deploy the hardware throughout the city. There's some cost to that deployment, as you can imagine, because it's Erie, for those of you who are looking on your maps trying to figure out where we're at. The north portion of the country, northwest in Pennsylvania, right up against the lake, it gets a little chilly here. It comes December and January, February, and some snow. So we're going to be looking to deploy this in weather conditions, which adds to some of the challenges. But at the end of the day, the finances allows us to buy the hardware, deploy the systems, and because the fiber provider is financing the basic backhaul, our operational costs are relatively minimal. The Innovation District is providing the general data analytics and management on behalf of the city. We believe that it would have been a challenge for our city because they would have had to stand up additional services and personnel and all the costs associated with that. From a governmental perspective, and the time and energy that would have entailed would have been difficult, given that they're actually looking to try and be very lean, given some of their financing challenges. So private can do that. We can do it quickly. We can figure out how to pay our own staff, and then really it's providing the services the city needs. So the agreements between our entities allow for direct financing through the city. City purchases that hardware so that we get best costs. The private entities deploy it and maintain it, and that service maintenance plan includes a refresh about halfway through the 10-year life cycle. And this is a 10-year journey. And our entities like EID act as effectively a consultant to the city. So as we talk about that single pane of glass, the three services we mentioned today were not our intended end game. They're the base. So as we look at things like efficiency and waste management, as we look at, because we have a large body of water, sensing systems for water changes, health in our waste systems, all these types of things, for example, checking for opioid crisis issues, which is an issue in Pennsylvania. All these things are possible and are on our potential roadmap over 10 years. We can add them in as we show ways to reduce costs in our operations and essentially pay for new services and integrate them and provide the analytics and outcomes to the mayor and city council. So that's our financing strategy. Operationally, it's also beneficial because at the end of the day, we're going to be able to leverage our partnerships with the universities here to bring in, and we have 4 that are involved in related fields. 2 state universities, Penn State as well as Edinburgh, 2 regional Catholic universities, Gannon and Mercyhurst, all of whom have software and or cyber programs to ultimately provide us with staff and resources for analytics and services over time. So all these things come together, and the mathematics, finance, and resource of staffing and deployment and maintenance can sit on a 10-year cycle where a lot of times it's hard to predict forward. Did that help paint a little bit of a picture?
Yes.
I think that was terrific, Carl. And to speak to it more broadly, you know, each use case and each city is slightly different. But the way that we generally operate is that Digital Alpha and Quantela would fund somewhere between 70 to 90% of the initial capital expenditure, and then the city would be responsible for the annual OPEX, but it would be subject to KPIs being met. And so what we mean by that is if we're not providing the savings that we know that the smart technology combined with the analytics on our platform can provide, then the city wouldn't be on the hook for that. We would. So if we said, we're going to save you 50%, per year because we're using CIMCON controllers and we're optimizing, lighting, and it turns out that we're only saving 5%, at the end of the day, we would be on the hook, for that. We're very confident with our partners, and we're very confident, especially with CIMCON, so we know that that's not going to be the case. But the idea is that we've proven out these KPIs, and so we know that the savings are there, and that's why we're willing to take these risks. And so we find out, where these areas are in the cities that we feel that we can fund and be successful over time, and then we work on those to come up with a model that works for cities. There's several questions and questionnaires that we like to find out before we get in, such as, do you have permissions to control, the lights? Do you have permission to monetize the Wi-Fi? And so we'll send out those questionnaires. We'll put it into a spreadsheet, make sure that it makes economical sense. And then if it does, we start to move forward to the process. And what Carl explained, goes from theoretical to actually becoming a reality, which was the case in Erie, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and I think thank you for that, Aaron. And I think there was a really, really key point in that discussion. It's moving the risk. That's yet another element of this finance model that's really interesting. From a city point of view, any kind of major investment, is always going to entail a certain amount of risk. There's no question about that. And there's going to be a certain amount of ownership in terms of right of way, et cetera, that the city will ultimately always have to own. But if you can de-risk the financing, that's a phenomenal advantage. Now, there's a lot of ways to do that. I'm sure a number of folks have explored those. But the key here is that we found a way to do this, and we also found some unique partnerships to further that expansion. And I think that's the message. Find creative partnerships in your city, and you can draw down at least one risk that's a significant risk for a city when they make a major long play decision. So this would probably be a good point, Liz, if you have a question or the audience has a question for us to field those.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. Again, this has been really informative so far. So we have a few questions here, but of course, for those of you guys in the audience, now is a great time to type those into the bar. So this question is actually going back to some of the points you were speaking about earlier about your specifics of your project, Carl. Can you dive a little bit deeper into the fiber deal that you made with, I think you said the vendor was called Velocity Net. How did you go about negotiating that that specific deal for free service?
Yeah, there's several elements to this. We're fortunate in some regards, and I guess in a lot of ways, actually, to be fair. In Velocity Net's case, they are the primary fiber provider throughout the city. So if you take a look at where the fiber lines run and who controls them, it's a private company, and they've been in place for some time. The owner is a person who grew up and has spent a lot of time in Erie and has built his entire career here, so feels very much of a resonance to the city that's been his home and his business's source of revenue for decades. So in this particular case, it wasn't a long stretch to say, look, we're not asking to impact your normal business. We just want to expand on unused bandwidth to benefit our citizens. And this is something that you can reflect and be part of the solution on, because you control essentially the highway for that data. And being a good citizen and being a good business, he agreed to that. Now, there's obviously going to be a cap on that. It's you can't, we're not everybody's going to be hopping on and running video 24/7, but for basic services, it's free of charge and allows most folks who need to do email or all the things that you would typically do, hop on, hop off, and be effective and no extra cost. And with that kind of spread availability, we would basically have anywhere access, particularly focused in the areas that usually would be the opposite, the last ones to be successful like that. That was part of that model. We also had to have a conversation, and this was a challenging one in some ways, with our utility, in the sense that what you're talking about is a movement of revenue. You know, what does that look like for their company, and how do they act as a good corporate citizen providing energy services? You know, having that conversation was also a key piece of the equation, allowing everybody to recognize that we're working to a common good. We're not upsetting history of good service and good citizenship, but we're just changing the field. But at the end of the day, that does mean that there's money freed up for the city in order to do this model, to pay their piece of the investment and do it without having to raise taxes. So if you look at it from the point of view of a municipality, being able to add new services, add new functionality, and not raise your taxes, and do this with a payment cycle that's really nominal over a long stretch of time, or 10 years, a fairly good stretch of time, that's a pretty attractive opportunity, and that makes it possible to have this discussion without a whole lot of issues. So really what you boil down to then is, what is it that we're going to provide and why? And for us, access, so we have a consistent digital accessibility to everybody, was number one priority for our district and our city.
Great. So you also mentioned earlier that you had that the Erie Innovation District is a 501c3 acting for the most part on behalf of the city. Tell us about the process of making that decision and getting to that to that point where you have the 501c3 acting on behalf, which seems like a huge benefit, specifically because of some of the implications that you mentioned about donating space for access points.
Yeah, it's every city is going to be different. Obviously, it's a different journey. We're not as large as, say, a Philadelphia or a Pittsburgh, where there's certainly going to be a lot more entities engaged in the conversation. So in that regard, being a smaller city actually works in our favor, allows us to move a little quicker. But the journey here started with a discussion between EID, the local University of Penn State, and Quantela, looking at, hey, we have this idea for a smart city. There's lots of opportunities to not only provide better services, save some money, but also maybe create a whole new ecosystem of jobs. So this was really started on the private side, and it was brought over to a new mayor. In our case, we had just had a change in administration literally in the same year, at the beginning of the same year. And the new mayor was very much in favor of building an ecosystem where family sustaining jobs with a new median income would be something that would be part of his tenure. And so coming to him and saying, hey, look, we're going to try and design this. We're going to try and design this in such a way that it does not raise requirements for the city. In fact, it should reduce some of those requirements and come at no new taxes, so that we can offer this to the citizens without taking anything away, without trading out something. So that conversation started about 18 months ago. It had to expand to city council, because now you're looking at right of way for access to poles and any sort of street changes and the rest. And I think that part would probably be reasonably consistent across all different cities. And then the question, of course, becomes, how do you acquire the hardware? What kind of process do you use for that? What other funds do you want to develop for additional services over time? And I think that's going to be a continuous journey. It's not a one stop and we're done type of dialogue. But for us, it was about 18 months. And, I expect, every time we close one phase, we'll be looking to see what's the next, low-hanging fruit that we can do that will leapfrog our city and bring direct and indirect benefits. So I would say that probably is a fair characterization. And where we do get into discussions, and inevitably, I expect we will get into discussions where it can't all be financed 100% without some sort of trade. As there's more and more of those kind of dialogues, we will be actively engaging with the broader community. There will never be a scenario where we trade off a service or a potential in our city without the citizens having a strong voice. And yes, that is in fact something appreciative. In this case, it was we're able to offer it, clearly provide a value service, and there is no impact otherwise. So that is that's obviously a very short putt. When we do have to do those trades, inevitably we will have continuous dialogue. As it is, everything is presented and shared through our city council and voted on, and I think that's pretty much par for the course for, in some form, for all governments, local governments.
Got it. All right, one last question here from the audience. Monetizing is one thing, but savings is another. You mentioned briefly about a payback period where the funds would be coming from the savings over time. Can you talk a little bit about what those savings might be?
Yeah, so
Well, yeah.
I
go ahead, Eric.
Oh, go for it, Carl, and then I can take a second if you'd like.
Sure. From our end of the game, it was really a question of the public utility rates. So when you look at the standard lighting, it's always on, always off. So literally like a light switch, your lights are on, your lights are off. They're fairly dumb. They're sodium vapor. So what that means is we're burning more energy than we necessarily needed to, which you could have gotten from LED lighting. But more than just the LED lighting, and this is where things like the CIMCON hardware and the rest come into play. Now you can not only get a savings from reducing and improving the LED, but you can also control the conditions, timing, level of intensity, a number of things that were not available. I mean, these literally were the lights went on, the lights went off at certain times. This way we can actually structure it to where it makes the most sense, both in intensity and frequency and time of day. And the net is a substantial savings in energy usage and cost on an annualized basis. That's money the city isn't paying out. They've recaptured. Now the question is, what are they going to do with it? In this case, we're trying to provide services that didn't exist. Aaron, I'm sure you got things you could add to that.
Yeah, so I think that there's several use cases where the savings are clear. Lighting is definitely among the top of that list. We project just from switching, from your traditional lights to LED, you can save roughly 40 to 70% a year there alone. And then once you take advantage of Quantela's Atlantis platform to build intelligence and smart analytics on that, while leveraging the smart nodes that CIMCON provides, you could add an additional savings on top of that, anywhere to 10 to 30%, depending on utilization there. So that's very clear savings within the lighting use case. If you try to look at other use cases, some examples could be, waste management. Within that, there's a lot of routing issues where it's not necessarily being optimized route management. And so by optimizing, when the waste trucks go to where they go, you could get significant savings because you have, less trucks out there. Another example would be parking. The way that we're able to provide, savings is through smart parking. You are able to provide more tickets, which, I guess that wouldn't necessarily be savings, that would be additional revenue. But another way you can is, since you're digitizing most of it, you don't need as many people going around providing those tickets. So whereas you may need 3 ticket enforcement officers in a single area, you would only need 1, because all of the data is coming to them digitally, and they know exactly where they need to go to provide enforcement. So there's many different domains within the city where savings can be had. I put lighting at the very top of that list, and then there's several others from there that I mentioned, but there's more in addition to the ones that I did mention, and I'm happy to get into those in greater detail offline.
Great, thank you, and we totally agree, and we'll echo all those points on the savings potentials with LED upgrades and, of course, intelligent lighting controls on top. So this has been a really interesting conversation, and we can't thank you guys enough for joining us here, Aaron and Carl, and of course our whole audience to help us have this conversation and dive deeper into this project. We're really proud here at CIMCON to have played a role in a project as influential as the Erie project has been. And so I want to thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, and
Thank you.
And as always, we encourage you guys, our whole audience, to stay tuned for future webinars that we have planned. Our next in this City Innovator series will be on open data projects for cities, speaking with one of our partners, Open Data Soft, that has a really interesting platform and helps cities utilize data from sensors or legacy data sets to make really interesting insights and add value to their cities. And in our webinar following that in December, we'll be speaking with Mitch Herricks, who is the Senior Advisor of Urban Technology in the City of New York. He is putting together a plan on cybersecurity for, of course, the largest municipality, one of the largest municipalities in the world. And so both of these are gearing up to be pretty exciting conversations. We encourage you to join us there. You can read more of those on our website, City Innovators Webinar tab. So we encourage you to join us. So Carl and Aaron, thank you again. We hope to speak with you all soon.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you to the audience for joining us today.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.